Hey guys, and welcome back to Lost Bits, the series where we explore the unused, altered, and unseen content in gaming. In the far-off time of 2005, a game combining one of the most popular toy lines with one of the most popular sci-fi franchises seemed like a recipe for a work of art, and I think it was. Although this was basically the only LEGO game I really got into, I played this game on the GameCube a lot growing up, and now, seeing the new LEGO Star Wars game that's just on the horizon here, I really wanted to give this series a spin on the channel. Now, I've never covered a LEGO or Star Wars game on the channel for that matter, so if you do enjoy this video and would like to see me cover the other LEGO Star Wars games or branch out to more LEGO games in general, let me and the YouTube algorithm know with a like down below. And with all of that said, let's become one with the plastic force. It's time to find some lost bits. Alright, so first up, let's kick things off with some characters that were at one point in development, at least planned to make an appearance in the game, but ultimately never made the cut. These unused characters include a Jawa, Boga, Zam Wesell, Spaceman that was going to be a character based on an old LEGO space set from the 1970s, or Benny as he's seen in blue in the LEGO movie, and then not characters themselves, but rather the vehicles they would occupy. There's Anakin Speeder, as well as Zam Speeder that also go unused. And although he can be made playable, particularly in the demo version of this game, it's believed that Spaceman was going to appear as an Easter egg in the game, but was scrapped due to time and budgetary constraints. And then for Boga, Anakin's, and Zam Speeders, as well as Zam Wesell herself, these were all actually scrapped alongside entire levels that were cut from the game, which we'll come back to later in this video. Now, those are all of the characters that were completely scrapped from the game, but there are actually various others that, although they do appear in the game, they aren't ever normally playable. These can be modded back into the game in mostly a usable form, suggesting that there might have also been plans for them to be playable. Anyways, these additional unused characters include an Imperial officer, Mahonic, one of the pod racers, a Gungan soldier, Watto, this fella just simply known as Medic, the waitress from Dexter's Diner, as well as even Dexter himself can be made playable. Oh yeah, there's also this weird camel thing that's only briefly seen on this Naboo stage known as a Falumpasets. Yeah, it can be made playable too. Now, I'd assume that some of these characters like Dexter probably wouldn't have made much sense in terms of gameplay mechanics, or they were just too obscure like Mahonic, so I'm sure these were hurdles they just couldn't pass to join the ranks of the other playable characters. Next up, let's talk about some unused graphics that are left in at least a few versions of this game. First up is a collection of images found in a Photoshop file carrying the file name Particle. We got what looks like a little bug fella, a snail shell, some punctuation in a bubble, as well as this purple textured blob thing. Now, based on the file name, outside of dealing with perhaps particle effects or something, it's unclear exactly what most of these were intended for. But interestingly, this snail graphic is actually a leftover from the Finding Nemo game released for this generation of consoles. Just like this game, Finding Nemo was also developed by Traveler's Tales, a game studio founded by John Burton, who you may have seen on YouTube as he now runs the Game Hut and Coding Secrets channels. Anyways, since Finding Nemo was also developed by Traveler Studios, it's no surprise that this graphic somehow found its way into here. Furthermore, there's also this unused graphic of a stained glass Dr. Neo Cortex texture. And this texture is actually a leftover from Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex, which, just like Finding Nemo, Traveler's Tales also developed. And not only did it find its way into this game, apparently it's also found leftover unused in the Finding Nemo game as well. I guess these graphics were shared between all sorts of games that they were developing around this time. Then next, only found left over in the GameCube release of LEGO Star Wars here, is this low-res graphic of a lion that was apparently associated with the game's save icon. I assume some sort of placeholder or something, as no lions like this ever appear in Star Wars, at least not in these games. And lastly, for the unused graphics, yet another placeholder, we got this unused default texture, which isn't shy about telling us exactly what it is. And then, although not in the final release of the games, in the Xbox demo of this game, there's actually a leftover unused video of the old Pixar intro video. Finding Nemo being a Pixar movie, I'm sure you won't be surprised when I tell you that this video was yet another leftover from the Finding Nemo game. Next, pivoting to some audio stuff, the demo of the PC release of LEGO Star Wars actually has several audio bits that never made it to the final release. First up are various short LEGO sound effects, and then there's also an unused voice clip of everyone's favorite Star Wars character, Jar Jar.
Howard!
Next up, oddly, the PC demo as well as PS2 prototype versions of this game actually had sound effects in a much higher quality than is heard in the final releases. Now, me just telling you that the sample rate is doubled in the higher quality versions is one thing, but hearing the difference is believing, and I think it's a quite noticeable downgrade. There's a whole bunch of sound effects like this, so in the interest of time, I won't be going over all of them, but here is an example of a few. I would assume that the decision to use the lower quality audio files was to save on storage space, but yeah, the quality is noticeably inferior when compared. And now let's finally move on to some levels that were scrapped from this game or just simply go unused. Starting with Star Wars The Phantom Menace, first is a scrapped level that would feature Anakin's flight in the Naboo starfighter in the space around Naboo. Now, although this stage, as well as a few others, are left over in the final release, they are only left in a very incomplete state, as you aren't normally able to access them in the way they were intended. For example, with this Anakin's flight stage, since you can't access this stage as the Naboo starfighter, much of it doesn't work as intended. That said, in general, this stage isn't really up to par with the rest of the finished levels in the game, and that shouldn't be a surprise considering it was scrapped and wasn't fine-tuned. Thankfully though, developer John Burton has uploaded footage of this as well as some other unused stages on his Game Hut YouTube channel, so we can get an awesome glimpse into how this level was intended to play out. And furthermore, this stage is actually found intact in a prototype of this game that has been unearthed, but more on that later. Anyways, after a short cutscene that also goes unused, the level starts with the player piloting Anakin, piloting a Naboo starfighter, towards one of the Trade Federation donut ships. On the way, there are several waves of enemy starfighters that pass along to try and halt your progress, but of course, with no success. In his video, Mr. Burton explains that at the point the stage was axed, only very simple programming was done here, limited basically to the starfighter controls and simple enemy patterns. In this gameplay, we can also see an early version of the proton torpedoes that kind of just lob here, and these weren't fully implemented in this game, and it wasn't until the second LEGO Star Wars game where they were finally realized. Then the second phase of the stage would have had you flying along the top of the Trade Federation ship, and you would have to shoot down several shield-generating dishes until enough were destroyed to lower the ship's shields. Now, one rather glaring problem that was seen with this section is that since it was basically on a loop, if the player missed any of the shield dishes, they would have to fly all around the ship again to have another go at taking it out, and this could lead to a lot of downtime. Then the next section sees the player inside the Federation ship, and you would have to blast doors to open them up, or at least until the last one, which wasn't finished. Then for the next section of the stage, just like in the movie, Anakin is grounded, and here you have to blast away at droids as well as aim towards the reactor core in the back to try and bring destruction to this ship. And then of course for the last section of the stage, very similar to the third one, you would have to fly again through the ship to now escape it before it goes boom in yet another unused cutscene where we see the fighters escape, as well as all the droids below on the plains of Naboo get deactivated. Now, according to Mr. Burton, the stage was ultimately scrapped to try and keep parity with the number of levels from each movie in the game, with, at the time, episodes 2 and 3 having 6 levels each, episode 1 had 7, and yeah, I guess they just wanted things to be even. Thankfully, however, this stage was later reworked into the complete Saga release of this game, and although some sections were altered a bit, most of the ideas were carried over. And although Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, was planned to have 6 levels, in the final release, there were only 5. So, yep, you guessed it, that brings us to the next scrapped one. As hinted by the Unused Characters earlier, this unused level was that of the bounty hunter chase scene from Attack of the Clones, where Anakin and Obi-Wan chase down the bounty hunter Zam Wesell on Coruscant. Unfortunately, unlike the last stage, there isn't much left over in the final release for this outside of the characters and vehicles that were cut, as well as this cutscene that was planned to play at the end of the level, and as you can see, it isn't in what one would call a finished state here. Thankfully, yet again, this was another level that was eventually reworked into the LEGO Star Wars Complete Saga game, as you've been seeing here. Also for Episode 2 is a scrapped level in which the only real leftover for it is the name Jango. As such, it's not 100% clear what the stage would have been, but it's speculated that, based on the name, although you do end up fighting Jango on Kamino in this game, this might have been an early version of that fight, if not different than the one that's seen. Then moving on to Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, we got an unused stage known as Boga Chase, which, you guessed it, would feature Obi-Wan riding a Boga to chase down General Grievous. And thankfully for us, just like with the Anakin's flight stage, gameplay of a version of this stage was uploaded to the Game Hut channel, so we can see an awesome glimpse into what it was intended to look like. Although once again in a very early and incomplete state, we can see that this stage was going to be an on-rails level where the player would ride the Boga through various valleys and such. And I gotta say, I really like this placeholder Boga here. Furthermore, there's this section of the stage where obviously this was an extremely early point in developing it, as there's basically no graphics applied here yet, and this was apparently going to be an underground section in the stage. Anyways, apparently a major reason as to why this level got snipped is that it was deemed that it wouldn't really make sense with the game's co-op mode. I mean, I guess there could be a second player controlling another Boga, but in story mode, where the game is meant to be played similar to how the movies play out, this wouldn't really make sense. Now those are all of the major unused levels, but there are also a few more minor ones, or ones with very little left over. First up is Pig Farm, and unfortunately, with the Pig Farm folder and all subfolders being empty, besides the file name itself, it's basically impossible to speculate what these were meant to be. Then next up is Vader D, and this stage is only left over in the Xbox release of this game, and this appears to be an unused Episode 3 segment around the Obi-Wan and Anakin fight. There's not all too much to the stage though, unfortunately, as it's pretty incomplete. And lastly is a small unused test room, simply known as Test, and this one is also only found in the Xbox version. This is a very basic area as it just has a flat gray platform, a gray background piece, as well as this light effect thing in the middle here. Certainly not the most interesting test map we've seen on this series, but hey, cool that it's still at least accessible. Although it's too bad that some of these stages didn't make it into the final cut, I'm certainly glad that they did go on to be repurposed into the complete saga. And yeah, it's awesome that early footage of a few of the maps has been released as well. And although I think these are the more interesting ones, this is only scratching the surface of all of the unused levels in the game, as there are numerous others. Most of them are just early, often extremely broken versions of existing maps, emphasis on the extremely broken. But there are also a few more notable ones, including this area that is apparently a map that's left over yet again from the Finding Nemo game, obviously it isn't quite right here, as well as this area with only a droideka and some text that seems to be a placeholder for where cutscenes were going to be added in. Now we won't have time to dive into all of these here, but if you're interested in seeing the rest of the unused stages, definitely check out Linterny Gamer's channel, as in addition to documenting all of these unused levels there, the channel is an absolute goldmine when it comes to unused content for LEGO games. Anyways, I mentioned a few cutscenes associated with the unused levels earlier here, but there are actually numerous other unused cutscenes. A lot of these are again earlier versions of ones that went on to be used, but some of them are pretty interesting to see in their early state. Either there are numerous visual problems, or the animations are, very basic. Once again, if you'd like to watch all of them, head on over to Linterny Gamer's channel. There are some awesome compilations and comparisons of the early versions to the ones that went on to be used in the final release. Linterny Gamer has also covered some unused death animations for this game. The first of these is a simple one where the character kind of just falls down as they die, and then the second one is one where the character's Lego pieces kinda just disassemble and explode. Now, the characters do kind of explode when they die in this game, but it seems like only a few pieces remain. At first I thought maybe it was deemed that characters dying like this might be too gruesome for a LEGO game, but similar stuff is seen in the game, so honestly, I have no idea why these go unused. Next up, everyone's favorites, unused text stuff. Now, LEGO Star Wars 1 actually has quite a few things in the unused text department, and in the interest of time, I'll only be going over the ones that I deemed more notable, but as always, if you want to snoop through all of them, you can head on over to the cutting room floor, which is linked down in the description below. Anyways, although the game already has several cheats that can be unlocked, there are leftover text strings for a few more that seem to have been cut from the game. These include being able to play the game on both an easy and hard difficulty, safe mode, which I thought at first would have meant unlimited health or something, but that's probably not the case, as there's also an unused string for unlimited health, so I'm not really sure what safe mode could be. And finally, special Yoda chair, which I assume would replace Yoda's floaty chair with something more special. Then next is a text string simply reading legal mumbo jumbo, and seeing as how this string precedes LEGO as well as the classic Star Wars intro text, I'd reckon that this was a placeholder for the game being booted up, where the legal mumbo jumbo would appear before LEGO and then the build up to the intro cinematic. And lastly here for the unused text stuff, there are some placeholder names for a few of the game's characters. For example, we got the placeholder name Was X-Wing for the Arc Fighter, implying the developers initially just called it the X-Wing, probably for simplicity. Then similarly for Commander Cody, there's a leftover placeholder name, Now Cody, not Sand Trooper, implying that Commander Cody was once just listed as a Sand Trooper. And then finally for Padme, there's the placeholder name Accented Padme, likely there to remind the developers to actually add the accent to the E in her name. Now next up, LEGO Star Wars the video game here actually has a debug menu left over in the game that can still be accessed. It's honestly quite robust with numerous features, so let's go through a few of them here. We got some debug menu staples like being able to display an FPS counter, and there are also some super useful features here for unlocking everything. If you're someone like me that doesn't really have time to play through a whole game anymore, being able to unlock all of the levels, characters, cheats, and more is super handy. And not only that, if you're too lazy to even walk around Dexter's Diner to get between levels, you can also not only just warp right to a level, but even right to a specific segment of the level if you really just want to start off at a certain point. Once again, super handy for those with time constraints. Other toggles on this debug menu include being able to disable the heads-up display graphics, turning on a moon jump cheat to allow you to float up to wherever you want to go, which of course can help you reach areas faster or reach areas you normally aren't supposed to. You can also toggle a display that humorously moves around and tells you if a cutscene is being loaded. It's kinda weird. And finally, you can also activate a free camera. So if you're not emulating this game or anything like that, you can actually zip around the camera even if you're playing on console with this. Now, it is quite limited in terms of controls, as it seems you can only pan the camera around, but hey, still pretty cool to have access to here. And speaking of the free camera, next, not really unused, but as a small aside here, when moving around the camera, I wanted to check out how the reflections were handled in this game. And it turns out that there is actually a second duplicate model of basically everything that's reflected found under the floor here, giving us the illusion of it being reflected. Now, we've seen this technique done in several other games I've covered on this series, but nonetheless, I always find it really cool to see. Now, that's about it for the final release of this game, at least for the scope of this video. But we got some more things to talk about, as in 2021, as part of HiddenPalace.org's Project Deluge, where a whole bunch of PS2 prototypes were publicly released, a prototype of LEGO Star Wars 1 was also unearthed. This prototype carries a build date of January 10th, 2005, almost 3 months before the North American retail release of the game. Anyways, here some changes are present from the final release, one of which is seen behind Dexter here at his diner. This prototype version had different beams on the sides with what appears to be some lights, And as opposed to only 4 options as seen in the final, this prototype has several more icons to choose from, including a heart, some blasters, several early eye graphics, as well as an earlier graphic for the character shop. This shop was certainly a work in progress, but yeah, it seems like at one point the idea was that you could buy or maybe even upgrade health and blaster power. Other smaller details I noticed that were changed include the force field effect around the ship museum outside is missing, as are the vents seen here in the final. And at this point, the studs were actually also referred to simply as coins. But probably the biggest thing with this prototype is that the scrapped Anakin's flight stage is actually still intact here. Well, mostly anyway. It even has its own dedicated door in the diner, so we can also see how this room was altered to account for the removal of this stage as well. The level itself plays much like what was shown off by John Burton in his video, but it's really cool to actually be able to play the stage. The segments within the level don't seem to load into each other properly yet, so the stage isn't really finished. Like, for example, you can't destroy the reactor in this room yet, which is required to progress. But regardless, again, I think being able to play the stage is great. Furthermore, with this level still being intact here, by using the debug menu and unlocking all of the mini-kits, we can also see a scrapped mini-kit set that appears outside of the diner with the other ships. So, it appears that the planned mini-kit set for the stage was going to be the Trade Federation ship, and this was completely removed. And it also appears that the order of the ships outside here were changed considerably as well. And even more on these ships, in the prototype we can also see the early X-Wing name for the Arc Fighter that we went over earlier, which I thought was pretty cool. Also, to touch back on something we discussed earlier, Commander Cody's name is yet again different here, as he's simply listed as a clone trooper of the Sand variety. Oh, and also the Rebel troops are known as Rebel Scum here, which I thought was pretty funny. And lastly for this demo for this video, the secret bonus intro to Star Wars Episode 4 doesn't seem to be complete here. In addition to just looking much less polished, when you get to the Leia and R2 room here, nothing really happens instead of a cutscene starting as it does in the final. Also, I noticed this weird little box that would pop up when I'd leave this room and then leave when I entered back in. It was kinda strange. Being only a few months away from release, seeing the state that this Anakin's flight stage was left in here, it's no surprise to me why it was cut, as there probably wasn't enough time to have it polished up. But at the end of the day, I'm glad that this prototype was released publicly for everyone to experience at least a taste of the original version of this level before it was reworked into the complete saga. Anyways, that'll wrap it up for this first LEGO Star Wars video, and I hope you enjoyed. Again, if you did, be sure to let me know. I'd really like to cover some more games in this series. Till then though, check out some of my other lost bits and subscribe to find your way back for future videos. And as always, thanks for stopping by, and I will see you in a bit.